So as Yogesh correctly said, we began a journey from Delhi, and after covering 5,000 kilometers, we are in Armenia now. And that is the time when the lockdown was announced. So we are here, and tomorrow we are planning to travel back. So as we are in Armenia, I thought this is the time for me to tell you something about Armenia. You know, 2 years back, uh, Armenia saw a non-violent revolution. You know, Armenia was part of USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republic, and when uh, USSR fell apart, they became independent. And after independence, they had leadership change. But every time leadership change was somewhat a violent change. But 2 years back, for the first time, Armenia saw a non-violent revolution, right? And a change of power non-violently, and that is very very interesting for this country and especially for this region. Now, uh, change of power non-violently is quite a common thing in different parts of the world. Nothing new about it. But what is interesting, what is for you to reflect, for my audience to reflect, is that after the non-violent transfer of power, non-violent struggle for transfer of power, when they came to power, young people are not sitting down saying that, okay, now there is a new prime minister, he will take care of everything. Young people are exploring how do we go deeper into non-violence. This is something India missed out. After independence struggle, after under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, we got freedom. But after freedom came, we didn't take it very seriously. We thought the prime minister will take care of India. Now here, young people are not leaving it to the prime minister. They have taken responsibility to explore how this non-violent revolution can be taken forward. So what are they doing? They are trying to understand what can be a non-violent model of development. See, development as it is today, you can see in India, poor people are displaced, big companies are moving into villages, uh, drinking water is not available, but major companies are bottling water. So the slums are becoming bigger and bigger. So you see what is development in our country, in India. So young people here are thinking, oh, what is this development? We don't want that kind of a development. We want a non-violent development. Probably this is time for Indians also to think, can we have a non-violent development process? Here, the young people are thinking about non-violent governance. See, how do you run a state? Now, what you see in India is that when powerful people come, officials will receive them. Poor people come, nobody is there to receive them. And when very poor people come demanding something, police is sent and police is beating them up. So, governance is basically powerful people controlling the powerless. That is what is happening in India. Here, young people are trying to find out how do we how do we proceed in a way that the governance becomes non-violent, that every ordinary person in the country feel that look, his or her voice is heard and justice is given. So how do you make the system non-violent so that the governance is not by police, but governance is by speaking? When somebody wants to meet a collector or a district authority, they are available to meet and talk, not send the police and say the collector has no time. So governance need to become more non-violent. They're also thinking how education can be non-violent. In our country, you see, education has become a huge field of competition. People who have money can go up, people who have no money will be dropped out, and once you are passed out you have to give huge amount of money to get a job. Education has become a cutthroat competition in our country, and that is the reason why young people continue to be into cutthroat competition, and they don't have the kindness and compassion for others because they were dealt roughly, so they also start dealing with others roughly. So can educational system be a non-violent process rather than people trying to get at the throat of others. How do we make a non-violent process where you feel invited, where you feel cared for, where you feel that you have a place, you are not under stress and competition all the time. Yeah, they're also trying to see how economy can be non-violent. See, at the moment in India, we have very rich people with huge amount of money and poor people without food, millions of them walking back from Ahmedabad and Bombay and Delhi. These poor people on one side and very, very rich people on the other side. So there was a recent study whereby 58 rich people in India has as much money as government of India. So this is not acceptable. This economy is not acceptable. So how do we create a non-violent economy? And also finally, they are looking at non-violent media. Media is only informing people about violence, and there is nothing about non-violence and peace. So how can the media become non-violent? So please understand, this is a possibility even for Indian young people, that rather than telling that, look, under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, we got freedom non-violently, and 76 years we have gone nowhere. So this is a time to understand from a very small country like Armenia and say, look, we also want to look at our system from a non-violent mirror and then see how we can transform the system and make it non-violent. So this is one request I want to make today, that the Indian youth need to develop this vision that we have the responsibility not only to find a job and make our house and family, but also to see India becomes a non-violent state. Good. So that is about the young people. But there's one more thing I wanted to share with you. We visited one organization recently in Yerevan where they are into research. So we asked them, what research are you doing? So they said, look, we are trying to find out roots of violence. This is the research. We want to understand in the socio-economic political system, where is the roots of this violence? You know, why our social system is so violent? We want to go to the root of the social system and its root of violence. We want to go to the economic system and its roots and find out where is the violence. Same, the social system. I mean, in India, this will be very interesting for young people to see why, even after 72 years, we have so much violence in the social system, the caste system, the way we treat Adivasis, the way we treat poor people. Where is the root of this social system that is creating so much of discrimination and injustice? And this is for us to find out. Our role is not only to find out where is the next job, also to find out why the society is behaving like this. Similarly, why the economic system is behaving like this, why the political system is behaving like this. Look, the word politics, if you look at the dictionary, the word politics means the art of organizing the society. Look at the dictionary and you will find this. The name of politics is art of organizing the society. What are our politicians doing? They are not organizing the society, they are making the society to fight with each other. You know, the political field has become a battlefield. Rather than every politician going to organize their own society, their own constituency, and making everybody happy, caring for their need, they are basically fighting in the name of religion and caste and then making a battlefield out of it. So, young people, when you see politicians behaving that way, you will also say, okay, that is politics. If I get into politics, I should fight election, I should spend a lot of money, I should use caste system to win election, and when I'm elected, then I should use power to bulldoze people and get contract and make money, etc. So we have a very, very wrong notion about politics itself. So please, young people who are listening today, look at the root causes of violence in our social system, in our political system, in our economic system, and try to deal with it. And that is what education is all about. Now, I want to tell you something about violence. Now, because we are discussing non-violence today, violence is a big business. If you know, violence and war is the biggest business of the world. Multi billion dollars are involved in this business of arms trade, gun, selling gun, selling big war weapons and making money and kickbacks, and there's no other lobby in the world that is as powerful as arms lobby. There is no other field where there is so much money. So violence has become one of the biggest business, and no violence is non-violence is nowhere, right? So these people who believe in violence, who believe in war, who wants to make money in the name of war and violence, they invest huge amount of money into research, into innovation. New equipments are made. New war equipments are made. Every day they are making progress. They hire the best scientists of the world. They hire the best economists of the world. So they have the best brains and huge quantum of money, and using this brain and money, they continue to promote the war industry. Now what is it? The old type of war is gone. Now this is chemical weapons. You hear about chemical weapons, and this is a modern thing. Now they are trying to move into an area where they can use robots for fighting war. You don't have to send human being, you can send robot to fight war. So this war industry, the industry of violence is progressing. Please understand that. And they are not only limiting themselves to war and violence, they are also coming to our homes. They are also into your colleges. If you look at the toy industry, how many toys are there in the shops? And most of the toys are violent toys, and our children play with those guns. Our children play with those violent toys, and we all encourage these young people, children playing with those toys. So they get to understand this is the best toy. So when I grow up, I should have a gun. And they are also into film industry. Much of the film industry is financed by those people who have a lot of money. And what is shown in the film? It is always a hero or a villain with the two guns in two hands, standing and shooting all around and killing people and winning. So you understand the film industry has really given an impression to young people that using violence is the way that you should move ahead in life. And you also have social media. Nowadays, the kind of hate and dislike and the kind of messages that are coming in social media, rather than using social media for spreading peace and non-violence and kindness, this is being used for spreading violence and hate and false news and fake news and whatnot. So please understand, this is not only in the war field where violence is used. Violence is very close to your home. Violence is in your classroom. Violence is in your colleges. So there is a mismatch. This is what I want to make you understand. That look, on one side, these people are investing in everything. The best brains are with them, and people who believe in non-violence are not able to do much. So how will the society be non-violent? In a world where so much investment is going into violence, the world will be naturally a violent world. So if we want to change it, we need to work hard to to deal with this mismatch. And this is not only that they are promoting violence, they also ridicule non-violence. Non-violence is called the tool of the weak. How many of you in your classroom hear, oh, yeah, what is this non-violence? They are all weak people, cowards. If you are a real man, take the gun, beat him up. So the language has come that we are made to believe that non-violence is the tool of the weak and violence is the tool of the powerful. And we all become victims of those lessons, and inside we believe that only through muscle power we can achieve anything, and otherwise we will be called weak. We all make jokes about mild people, soft people, good people, and we say, oh, this useless guy, I mean, good for nothing. So softness, goodness, These are all seen as bad qualities in the world, where power, aggression has become the quality of the world. So this is not a good sign for any good society. Now I tell you two small stories. One story is from America, where Mr. Obama, in America, this is quite common that everybody can have a gun. So young students, when they go to classroom, they put a gun in their bag. So when they get angry, they shoot. So it is a common practice in America that you hear every month one or two incidents in the newspaper that the students are taking gun and shooting when they get angry, when they dislike somebody. So this has become a very important problem in America. So when Obama stood for election, he said, "Look, if I get elected, I will bring a small arms control act, that this is not acceptable that everybody will carry a small arm, small gun, and whenever they get angry, they start shooting. This is not good." So he said, "Look, if I become president of America, I will bring this small arms control act." Believe me, he was president of America for 8 years, 2 terms, and he was not able to bring small arms control act. This is for you to understand that the arms lobby is much more powerful than president of America. That without taking them into confidence, you can't do any change in the law. So that is one negative example where the lobby doesn't allow you to do what you want to do in terms of making the world more non-violent. But a good example comes from Norway. See, in Norway, the newspapers were reporting violent news, and the society was becoming somewhat violent. So the Prime Minister of Norway called the media people, media heads, and told them, please don't print violent news in the newspaper because our children read it and they learn how to do violence. It's stealing or killing. So don't do that. And they also called the police officials and said, look, when you take people into prison, don't treat them as prisoners, reform them and make them good people. So when they, as soon as possible, they can come back to the society and join the society. Believe me, these two act by Norwegian heads of the state, that asking the newspapers not to report violence and asking the police department to treat prisoners well and reform them and send them back to the society as good citizens, created such a change that 58 percentage of crime rate came down by 58 percentage in Norway at that point of time. So you have many examples all over the world where if you make an effort, non-violence can succeed. If you and me will not make any effort and will only continue to believe that non-violence is for the weak and violence is for the strong, then the world is not going to be non-violent. So I will request you that you should move in this direction, in the direction of promoting non-violence. Now we are also planning to have a new movement in India, and this is called Youth for Non-Violence. Ahimsa ke liye yuva. So our Bhopal office will be coordinating this movement, and let us all join hands. See, after 72 years of freedom, why should India continue to suffer so much violence, socially, politically, economically? So let every young person join this new movement, that Youth for Non-Violence. And we want to create not only a non-violent India, but we also want to create a non-violent world. So that is one thing I wanted to request you to understand non-violence, understand the depth of violence that is happening today, understand how we can all play a role in terms of promoting non-violence and a non-violent world order. The second thing is about Jai Jagat. See, Jai Jagat, like in the introduction, it was said by Yogesh that Jai Jagat it's a big program. Rather than limiting ourselves to India, we thought we have a responsibility. People from Gandhi's country, Buddha's country, has a responsibility to take the message of Gandhi to the world at large. So we thought if you organize a conference, nobody will listen to us. So what is the right thing to do? Walk 11,000 kilometers. Walk from Delhi to Geneva, covering 11,000 kilometers through 11 countries. So we decided to get 50 young people, some from India, some from other part of the world. And on 2nd of October, we began to walk. We covered a large distance, about 5,000 kilometers before the lockdown. So we did 2,000 kilometers in India. We did some journey in Nepal. We did some journey in Pakistan. We did some journey in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. We did some journey in Iran. And finally, a month, 400 kilometers in Armenia. So we are in the capital of Armenia now, and walking is important. Calling a conference is not going to work. Why walking is important is because when you suffer, people are willing to listen. If I call a conference, nobody is willing to listen. Okay, so many conferences are there. People are tired of going to conferences. But why are these crazy people walking? Walking in hot sun, walking in minus 15 degree in Armenia. Why are these people taking the trouble? Why are they going to these difficult areas? So the idea was, can we take some suffering onto ourselves so that people will listen globally? And that is why Jai Jagat Yatra was designed in that style. But when we arrive in Geneva, the idea was to have a 1 week conference and talk to United Nations, IMF, World Bank, WTO, ILO, all these organizations. Many of them have office in Geneva. All these officers need to listen to us because we wanted to tell them this development model, this economic model will completely destroy the planet. This is all what we wanted to say, right? This is why we are walking 11,000 kilometers to Geneva, just to say, look, your model of World Bank and IMF and WTO, and this model is going to destroy the world completely. The planet will be destroyed, so the people will also be destroyed. So destroying people and planet, what is this development model? Making some people rich and creating so much poverty and misery for millions of people. So that is why we were walking, and we thought we will go to Geneva and do that. Now, because of COVID-19, that program is postponed for next year. So next year when we walk, all of you should join, because only 50 people can walk because of expenses, but then 50 million can join through social media and other medias, and make it a very powerful action so that the World Bank and IMF will be forced to listen to our voice. So we have a responsibility to work in our village, work in our state, work in our country, but we also have a responsibility to take the message of Mahatma Gandhi, especially this is 150 years of Mahatma Gandhi. So we should take this responsibility. And this campaign was built around 4 pillars. One was the issue of poverty. See, poverty, you can see poverty now. After the lockdown, you see poverty in India. Whenever we took 25,000 people, 50,000 people, 1 lakh people to Delhi, this is what we wanted to do, show the world the scale of poverty. But maybe even 1 lakh people didn't touch the heart of people. Now, when millions are marching, it's touching the heart of people. So that's the scale of poverty and misery that is needed for the middle class and upper middle class to feel sympathetic and compassionate in a country like India. So that is happening now, one way, thanks to COVID-19, because COVID-19 was able to touch their heart by exhibiting so much of poverty and misery. So poverty is a big issue. 1% of people controlling 58% of global wealth is not something acceptable. So we wanted to go to Geneva to say that very clearly and challenge it. We also wanted to speak about discrimination. Discrimination in the name of gender, discrimination in the name of Adivasi Dalit, in discrimination in the name of color, discrimination in the name of religion. So our world is full of discrimination. And this discrimination is not going to create a happy, healthy world. So we wanted to challenge the discrimination part when we were in Geneva. Then we also wanted to speak about climate crisis, because The scientists are warning us that look, in 10 years' time, the planet can end if we don't change our behavior. If we continue to produce and consume the way we are producing and consuming and wasting, then the planet cannot stand it anymore. So 10 years time. So uh, uh, we wanted to discuss about it when we are in Geneva. And finally, we wanted to speak about violence and non-violence and say that only a non-violent world order can be a peaceful world order. And so don't promote this war and war industry, etc. So we were building our campaign on these four pillars: poverty, discrimination, climate crisis, and non-violence. So maybe we will be able to continue the journey next year and achieve it. And the reason why we selected this route is also interesting because we were identifying some of these conflict areas. Look at that, South Asia. We have so much conflict. The conflict between Pakistan and India, three generations are standing it. After freedom, 72 years means about three generations have stood this conflict between Pakistan and India. And how long should that continue, this conflict? So, can we help the next generation to live in peace? So, that was one challenge. Can we bring peace in South Asia? Similarly, the Middle East. Middle East has so much of conflict between country to country. Can we bring about peace in that area so that people can live happily? Because we were in Iran, and Iranian people said, look, because of this conflict, we can't live happily. So they also want peace. People really want peace. Now, here, Armenia is part of the Caucasian region. And there is so much of conflict because this is an all Russian region. So there is a lot of conflict and they are not able to deal with it and they want our help in dealing with those issues. And then when you go to Balkan, the old Yugoslavia, you have so much of conflict in the name of religion, in the name of ethnicity, etc. Then when you go to Europe, it's full of conflict because refugees are coming to Europe and they are creating walls, and walls are not going to stop poverty. So why invest on wall rather than investing on poverty? So we selected this route in a very clear way so that we are not only walking, training young people in non-violence and raising the issue of four pillars, poverty, etc., but also trying to understand for our own education and see how can we contribute in terms of bringing peace in the world. So rather than speaking about world peace, we have to speak about regional peace to begin with. So our idea was to bring about regional understanding. Now I have two major issues to share before I end. One is for the educated young people of India. I have two issues. I know many of you who are listening to me today are people who have passed out of colleges and universities. Some of you are in IIT, etc. So uh, this is interesting to know what Mr. Kapoor said. You know, Kapoor is in the University of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is in America, and he's head of a department that is looking at Asia. So when Kapoor came to Chennai, the Hindu newspaper made an interview with him, right? And Kapoor was asked, Mr. Kapoor, tell us, how can we bring justice to the poor people of India? And the answer of Kapoor was very interesting. He said, look, you can never bring justice to the poor people in India. And that's shocking, isn't it? If somebody who is sitting in Pennsylvania research department looking at India constantly and telling that you can never bring a peace to poor people in India is shocking. So the journalist asked, why do you say so? Because we have all these institutions which are supposed to deliver justice to poor people. We have the Human Rights Commission, we have the Women's Commission, we have the Commission for Children, we have the Commission for Backward Class, we have Commission for Tribals and the Dalits. So what are you speaking about? We have all these institutions, and why shouldn't we bring justice to the poorest section of the society? Kapoor said something very interesting. He said, "Look, Mister, uh, justice is not given by buildings. Buildings are just cement and iron. You may have a big collectorate, doesn't guarantee justice. New collectorate, new police station, new secretariat. These are all good to show the world. New human right commission, but then the buildings are not going to give justice. Justice is given by people who are inside, who are sitting inside. And these young people occupying the position, sitting on the chair, have no compassion, no kindness, because they have come through a cutthroat educational system, bribing people, taking contacts, and somehow getting into the system. And now they want to make money, they want to make their own life, and they have no interest in the poor people. So your country will not find it easy to provide justice to the poorest section. After reading that, I was very shocked for some days. I couldn't believe that if this is going to happen, what is going to happen to the poor people of this country? And now after COVID, you see this. Millions of people walking back. They will never get justice. Their land and resources are taken in the villages and they are thrown out. They are in the slums and cities. And when they walk back, there is nobody to care for them. So we have created a system where poor people will not get justice. And so one challenge is, can you can you revisit this agenda of heart? Something is missing in this rush for examination and competition and passing examination, getting a job and making money. The young people have lost their heart on the way. So there is no kindness, there is no compassion, there is no caring, and there is no. It's absolutely dry. So how do you create a caring world? How do we use our education to provide justice to others? So this is an important question that I want young people to reflect on. Otherwise, it will just end up as a speech. So please reflect on this issue. This is I'm appealing to you. I go from office to office, and I am pained to say, uh, very poor people standing in front of the legal court, lawyers making money out of them, and they get one next day, they don't get any justice. Poor people standing in front of the office of the collector, and the collector has no time to meet them. And very powerful people come and meet the collector and go away in the meantime. This I see almost every day because I keep moving with these people. So please think, how do we revisit our heart and make justice available to millions of people? They are not asking for anything else. They are not asking anything free. People who are paid, people who are occupying the offices, they have the responsibility to provide justice. And if this is not happening after 72 years, then going around and speaking about our country as a great country has no meaning. Right? So let us be proud of our country as a country where justice is available, where poor people are given justice, poverty is taken care of, and they will get justice, etc., etc. See, the greatness of a nation is not only singing songs about the nation. Greatness of the nation is also providing justice to the last person in the society. That is one. Second, the last one. Then I will get Jill to speak to you. The last one is about, why did we forget Mahatma Gandhi? See, Mahatma Gandhi may not be a great film star, looking so good, etc. So he may not be great, attractive personality, but he said so many things interesting. And why did we give it up? See, he was one politician, political leader, who was enlightened. So when every political leader was trying to fly up technology, science, and economy, etc., Gandhi is the person who was trying to pull them down to the reality. And so Gandhi said many interesting things. First thing he said, whenever you think of an action, think of the poorest and weakest person you have seen in the society. So for him, everything else is unimportant. If your plan, if your work, if it's not for the poorest person, then it's no use, your plan and your science and technology. So he said that. Then he said, greed and need. He said, there is enough for everyone's need, not enough for anybody's greed. He said, don't be greedy. Accumulation, accumulation. Take care of everyone's need. People are there and they need to meet their need. If they don't get that, they will also take to violence. So need and greed. This is something Gandhi said. Very important message. He also said mass production is not important. What is important is production by masses. Everybody should have the possibility to work rather than some big companies producing and putting everything in the market and people have no money to buy. So he was against mass production, and we can see now, because we went for mass production, we destroyed everything in the village. And now when people walk back to village, there is nothing for them. There's no carpentry, there's no blacksmithy, there is no leather work, nothing. So mass production is not what is needed. Production by masses. Gandhi said it many years back. And he also spoke about an eye for an eye will make the world blind, the entire world blind. So if you take my eye, I take your eye, then the world is going to be blind. So he spoke about a process of dialogue and understanding rather than hitting and killing each other. And he also spoke about means and ends. What is not important is not what you achieve. See, it is not that you become a minister. It's also important to know how did you become a minister. It's not important you become a rich man. How did you become a rich man? By exploiting or by good means? So he was a very sharp politician, very enlightened politician. And we, for reasons I don't know why, we gave him up. We are running after all the politicians. We are putting garlands to every politician. We are touching the feet of every politician. And this great politician, political leader, who introduced non-violence to us, he who introduced so many interesting values to our society, we gave him up. So I think this is what I call thanklessness. We are not thankful to people who give us good lessons. We are thankful to those people who give us bad lessons. So it is time for us to revisit Gandhi. So this is your age. See, you can do many things. Young people, whether you are in the social movement, whether you are in the social organization, whether you are in the college, whether you are a teacher, this is your age. People who are old may go soon, but then your age. You want to see a non-violent world order. You want to see a non-violent Asia where Pakistan and India is not fighting. You want to see a village where people are not helpless, but they feel proud to be part of a country called India or country called Brazil, country called Kenya, etc., etc. You want people at the bottom to feel proud of their country. You want a region where there is peace and mutual understanding. You want a world where everybody is happy. So if that is what we want, we should walk in that direction. If you walk in the wrong direction and then you want to reach there, you are never going to reach there. So I am very happy I had this opportunity to talk to you. There's a lot of issues about which we need to reflect. That's why I said more than asking me questions at the end, if I can hear your reflection, what do you think about it in Tamil, in English, in Hindi? That's no problem. But whatever reflections you have from this presentation, I'll be very happy to hear that.